I urge everyone I work with to, eliminate the word discount from their speech and thought, because there's much more exciting ways to talk about value. Another common issue is this problem of not involving the key people early enough, or not involving them at all, in fact. One of the UK companies I work with did a fairly detailed analysis of their failed proposals, as in the quotations that they did that did not result in business. And they discovered that wherever that happened, it was generally because they were cultivating the relationship with the wrong person in the organization. It was the number one reason for failed quotations, is the discovery afterwards that they should have been talking to somebody else. They've been having the meetings just with the wrong person. I'm highlighting this at the moment because, as we'll see later on, one of the most valuable words in your vocabulary is the risks that people run by not hiring you or not hiring the approach that you stand for. As a general rule of thumb, if we were to educate ourselves a bit more tomorrow, we should be educating ourselves on the risks that people run by not using our services. It is one of the greatest friends that you've got in negotiation. It's helpful at least at 3 points of the process. And sometimes we forget to highlight the risks, again, because we are perhaps so enthusiastic for the benefits or the solution or the positives that our services might bring. And finally, again, I'll address this more this morning. Sending a proposal before you have already discussed a budget guideline. So the first discussion of money shouldn't be on the end of an email or shouldn't be on the end of a document. There should have been some verbal discussion of budget guideline first before we start word processing that very detailed quotation or proposal. I could go on, don't let me, as we're not too many on the call and we have a little space for discussion. Is there any other pitfalls you would add from your own experience or things you've learned over the years to the 6 I've just outlined?
Yeah, John, Gerria, what I think is a pitfall, but I'm looking at overall projects, so not just as a one person to be hired. What I have considered to be a huge risk is if you set up a program or a transformation or whatever in such a way that there is no interest on customer side to participate and to change. Mm-hmm. So if you give all the securities, you run all the risks, and they just have a proposal that suits the CIO perfectly fine because he runs no risks, then you are certain that there will be misery.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed, that's very well put. There needs to be this partnership element rather than this servant or servitude element in the relationship. And the only way that there's partnership is if both people have some skin, or both organizations have some skin in the game, if both have a crucial commitment to make to the success of the project. Totally agree, yeah. By the way, what I'm outlining today works with organizations as well. It just, the language is a little bit different. I've just tailored it today on the assumption that many people here might be independent or selling themselves as a project manager. But the fundamentals of the approach are no different.
John, hi, good to see you again.
Hi, Jerry.
One that I've come across and I'm actually dealing a little bit with at the moment is accepting their terms and conditions as sacrosanct and non-negotiable, because it's a folly, particularly when the first thing you see is 60 days end of month as their and the clause your terms and conditions are invalid because our terms and conditions override them. I see that as an opportunity to have a chat, basically, Because, and you can only have that chat once you know that they want your service, not before, because if you start before, you probably cancel yourself out. But if once they say they want it, then you're in a stronger position to have that conversation.
We used to have a metaphor for that, Jerry, but we can't use it anymore in the age of political correctness.
No. I haven't seen her in a while, John.
Yeah. Indeed, totally true. The value of your services diminishes sharply after they have been performed. I'll leave you work back to the metaphor. Okay, let's crack on. What is value pricing? Well, it's relating your services, relating the value of what you do, relating your fees, let me say, to the risks and the gains associated with your work, rather than the time or the effort it takes to do it. As one tax consultant actually put it, you're not paying for the hours it takes me to do the job, but the years of experience that allows me to pinpoint what it is that we need to do. Again, I'm sure you could find a project management variant of that. And that basically means that we need to move away from what we often currently do, which is we work out how many days it's going to take to do the job, i.e. the content here. We need to work out, we need to move away from this model where we're pricing up from cost and time, and instead learn to price down from the context in which the job is going to be done. But this is a significant learning, and it's not going to be done in an hour. But we're going to try and do a kind of whistle-stop tour through what that entails. It means shifting our narrative, shifting our story. Instead of talking about our experience and our background and our anything, we need to instead become fluent in the challenges they're facing and questioning and getting them talking about the challenges they're facing. If possible, I'd steer well clear of talking about ourselves until we've had a good discussion about that. Secondly, rather than talking about design or quality or any other noble sounding abstracts, talk about the risks of getting it wrong. Much more valuable later on when you're dealing with objections. In our LinkedIn, in our habit of getting testimonials, instead of nice things that people say about us, nice adjectives, ask them what impact that had for them. That's a value-based, or it's a context-based feedback rather than adjectives about ourselves, which don't have the same impact. So you probably will be faced with a common problem. Certainly many are, particularly if you work through agents, of course, you'll definitely get this. Before we talk about any work, how much do you charge? This is a very common response. It's one that many people come up with. And I'm not a fan of scripting, but I actually do suggest you script this for yourself so that if woken up out of a sound sleep and someone asked you that question, you could recite the answer while you're still digging the sleep out of your eyes. It all depends on the work to be done. Let's talk about that. What do you need? Why do you need it? Etc. So you're not obligated to have a daily rate or an hourly rate. There's no legal requirement to have a daily rate or an hourly rate. So the starting point for the conversation is not how much do you charge. The answer is it all depends on what I'm doing. Let's explore that a bit more. And if you're pushed, as you will be, particularly right now, you can amplify in something like the following words. I don't work in that way. And then whatever way you do work, I charge a project fee for agreed outcomes, milestones. Even if later on you end up doing a daily rate, you can always do that by exception. What outcomes are you looking for? What we're attempting to do here is move the discussion from our rate to their outcomes. That's the beginning of a value. Well, it's one beginning. not the best, but it is a beginning for a value-centered conversation. Okay, let's get on to the more the structural stuff. I'm going to give you two versions of this. The first is the very short version, and the second is a slightly longer version, which is the steps to get there. But if we get the overall sequence clear in our heads first, then we have a better chance of actually getting the result. And watching the time, Brian. So first step is if we look at it as a sequence, the first thing you want to be talking about with any prospect is their world, their risks, the challenges they're facing, what happens if they get it right, what happens if they get it wrong, all of that, which I call the value. In other words, it's not about the project, it's about the context that gives that project value. It's not a scoping exercise. That's the common mistake. We begin the conversation with a scoping exercise because we're thinking in project management terms. The thing is, we have to think in business terms first, then we can define the project. So the value is the first step. The second is the budget. Now, whether we use the word budget or not, you might want to use the word resources, but we do mean financial resources, amongst others. That's the budget guideline, if you like, to which, or the resource guideline to which that project has to run, whatever it is. Then we talk about fees in the context of budget guideline. And then we fine tune the agreement so that we get, as Ger was describing earlier, we don't just do it all for them. That's a recipe to not getting the work, but instead we form a true partnership rather than servant relationships. So the sequence we want to follow is value, budget, fee, agreement. And I have on occasion expressly said that to prospects and to customers. There's actually nothing wrong with saying, look, this is the way we need to have the conversation. We're going to talk about what you want to do and why. We're going to talk about the resources needed to make that happen. We're going to talk about the fee structure, and that's pretty much what's coming up here. And we're going to talk about the other aspects, apart from money, that's going to be needed, particularly what you'll need to contribute to the project, going back to Gera's point, in order to make this a success. So value, budget, fee, agreement. As a side note, I suggest you avoid using the word value with customers, clients. Some of you know this already because we've already covered it, but why might you want to avoid the word value with the customer? Whether an existing or a prospect customer?
Yeah, because they want to monetize that, right?
All too often they'll be thinking pricing. All too often they'll think price. You'll mean, broader things, but they'll actually assume you're having a negotiation type conversation. Value is much bigger than the synonyms that come up in Word for that word. For that reason, this becomes, people laugh when I do this, but I would also suggest you avoid the word budget with customers, because that has a very specific meaning in organizations. Yes, I mean budget guideline, but actually we've learned over the years of doing this that the word resources might be a better word to use, at least in the earlier stages of the conversation. Okay, time check. Need to move on. Let's break that down into the steps, if you like, by which we get there. The first step is preparation. Now, there's a lot that can be said about this, and full disclosure, I don't do all the preparation for customer meetings that I know I should be doing. So hand on heart, this is a very big area. There is, however, one bit of preparation I always do, even if I have to do it while driving there or while logging into a Zoom call. But there's one question I always ask myself on the way in, whether that's a physical door or a link. And that is, what insight am I bringing to this meeting? Whether they want it or not, it's not I may not use it, but I make sure that I'm bringing something to a customer meeting. I don't mean my CV and my experience and my bio and my anything. That's not an insight. But the essential act in preparation is prepare a tailored insight to bring to a customer meeting. Now, we need to move on to other things today, but that's a new element for many people. And in general, in a 1 year of working with people, which is what I usually do, we normally spend the first month working on what is your current insight that you're bringing to any customer meeting today. Relevant to COVID-19, relevant to the world we're in, relevant to virtual working or team engagement or whatever else it is. We need to be bringing something to that meeting that's up to date, that is factual, that has a story behind it, that is compelling enough to have the prospect writing it down. And that's the test. Do they write it down? If they write it down, it's good. If they're kind of staring at the window or looking blankly at you, or even smiling as Gary is doing right now, then then it's perhaps not as compelling as we thought it was. Then we explore their needs. Why? Because we've gone in with the can opener of this insight. We've gone in there with something that we can we can reframe their thinking, if you like. And that's the next step, is to reframe. Now, what do I mean by reframe? I mean to tweak their requirements in some way rather than just accept their requirements. Again, like the CIO example Gary gave us earlier, we don't just accept requirements. We tweak them in some way. We suggest that they not forget the security element of the project. We link to unconnected projects. We do something to reframe their thinking before we talk money. Why might that be so important? Why not just write down their needs and start talking about how you meet them? That would be easier, wouldn't it?
It gives you, John, a chance to link it to you, give you something unique because you're perhaps changing the frame of reference to your playing field.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does. That's one very good reason to do it. Yeah.
I also guess because you start discussing in their own language, in their own, what it's bothering them.
Well, that would be the second step, Nassos. Getting their own language, finding out what's bothering them, finding out the consequences of that. That would be exploring need in this model. In this case, we go further. We actually get them to think about that need differently.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be massively differently. It's not like, oh, rethink the whole thing. That's actually a bad idea. That might cause the project to go into the long grass, and it may never come out. But
this is where you can bring in some of your expertise.
Yeah,
if you see blind spots, if you see risks that they don't see, stuff like that, you could trigger them to become aware of that.
Right. That's pretty much what Jerry has just said. I think it allows us to link it back to you. There is another reason, though. Apart from linking it to you, there's another reason why we might want to do this. There's a key word here called trust. If someone just writes down everything we says and go, yes, we have the perfect solution for you, here it is. What we usually hear is sales. Right? What we usually hear is what we expect to hear. Well, of course you'd say that because I had the experience very freshly last week of somebody, yes, we do that. Yes, we do this. Yes, we do this. We can look after this for you. And I'm going, it's not that easy because I know it's not that easy. What reframing does is it shows that you are thinking seriously about their needs and you're urging them to think slightly differently about it before we embark on a project together. And what happens in that conversation is you can watch the trust level, often in physical body language, you can watch the trust level go up. Because when a professional does that, they're not just yes men or women. They're actively thinking about your needs, and they're already stepping into how we're going to meet them. And one of the key reasons that that's very valuable is the next step is where we talk about options and budget. And as soon as you go into the budget guideline conversation, you want trust to be at its peak. Because you may be challenging them to come up with some numbers they don't currently have. And the only reason they're going to do that is if trust is high. This is also the reason they might introduce you to other stakeholders at this point. So this is when we talk about budget guideline, usually in the form of language such as, okay, let's talk about the budget guideline for this. I guess you're going to want me to give you some numbers. In the old days, I used to say, get them to come up with a number first. It's nice if they do. But actually, most of our buyers are pretty savvy buyers these days. They actually are talking to us for us to come up with the numbers. So I do give them a range of what others are investing in order to achieve similar outcomes. That can be, you know, depending on what you're doing, that can be between 2,000 and 5,000, between 20 and 50,000, whatever. But give them a range in which they can think. Or if there's several levels at which the problem can be solved, this is where you might be mapping out 2 or 3, no more than 3, please, it's too confusing. You might be mapping out, you know, 3 different approaches to this and gauging from them, A, what their appetite is, and secondly, what their pockets are for such an approach. Keeping it high level, we're not doing a detailed project plan, we're just talking about what others are spending and what's the approach that's going to actually be the right approach for you. Obviously, if you're doing a gold, silver, bronze, then introduce gold first, because if they look as if they're going for that, you might just want to stop talking. You know, there's no reason to carry all the way on down unless pushed. But by and large, over the years, the silver option is the one that people often go for because they assume it's the best value. It's the approach in the middle. You might want to bear that in mind when you're designing silver. Right now, we're seeing a lot of bronze. We're seeing people going for the absolute minimum that allows them to do what they're doing, because some of them don't know they're going to be in a job by the time we come around to doing silver and gold, and therefore they're looking for a bit of low-hanging fruit for the least possible spend. That's the sign of the times. It's what we're living in. But what you do get to define here is your gold, silver, bronze, and perhaps to also define whom you don't work with. This might be your minimum order value, but it might be around other things too. It might be about those customers that are not willing to partner with you in the relationship. I worked with, I'm still working with a client right now who's having a lot of success by saying, look, we only work on projects that are of strategic significance. If the project is not of strategic significance to the organization, we don't work on it. Because what's going to happen is the people on the board are going to say, we don't have time for this. And if they don't have time for it, we're not in. We only work on projects which has board level visibility and board level involvement. It's a subtle way of preventing the issue later on of not being able to get to key decision makers. And then we deal with objections, which I'm going to go on to in a moment, because that's an area that many of us profit from rehearsing. There is then the normal process of giving and getting, which is called negotiation. It's not a bad thing. You know, by the time you get down to those terms and conditions Jerry was talking about, that give-get process is actually quite, it can be a buying signal. So sometimes we can resent that part of the conversation. I suggest we learn to treat it as a buying signal and instead stay positive. And finally, there is the finer aspects of the agreement, which is very much about insisting on their contribution to the project. Again, remember, you're beginning a journey there at step 7, a journey of delivery. You want to elicit from them their buy-in and their commitment as well. It's not just enough to spend money with you. You know, normally we want them to be proactively involved in helping you in other ways. So that is important. Before we do objections, 7:39. Any comments on that process? Anything new for you in that process?
Well, not exactly new, but I realized that if you're indeed talking about overall projects, that it's slightly different, but that's logical.
Okay. I'm going to suggest, from experience, that even if people don't think these are new, they are. Number one, the preparation of an insight, to bring an insight to a customer meeting. Not a solution, an insight. For many, many people, that is new. Secondly, the reframe. Most people do explore need, I think. I mean, if they're seasoned professionals, most are pretty good at this. The shift usually is to be more context rather than content oriented in their questioning. But by and large, that's something that many project managers are already good at. The reframe, I think, is very important. A lot of us simply don't do it, and it is important to do so. And I'm trying to figure out where the background's coming from. If somebody can kill it, thank you. And the other bit that is often quite new for people is to discuss budget guideline here before writing a proposal. I'm getting the sound of a herd of horses moving across somebody's keyboard. Okay, let's talk a little bit about objections, because we still will get them. You know, usually in the form of that's too expensive, or very often these days we have somebody who will do it for less. So, you know, you're quoting 1,000 a day and they're saying, well, we got somebody who'll do it at 500. That's not uncommon in today's world. Suggestions, first of all, legitimize the objection. Sure, I'd be tempted to spend 500 rather than 1,000. Apart from that, what other issues are there? Sometimes the real objection isn't the money one. So hear it out before you start answering. And if necessary, get them to prioritize their objections. If we could resolve that, is there anything else that would stand in the way of your decision? That's another way, really, of doing this prioritization and what other issues. And then start dealing with that objection, whatever it is, whether it's about money or time or whatever. Then reframe it in terms of the risk that they run. This is the name of the game. Of course, it's more attractive to spend 500 rather than 1,000. Of course, it's always tempting to go with the person who's most available. What we find in practice is this creates the following risks. 1, 2, 3. Are you happy with that? If you can reframe your objection in terms of risk and get consensus about risk and risks to be avoided before proceeding, then you are well on your way to dealing with it. And I've added this, because you can probably tell, because I forgot it was in there. Consider offering a guarantee. Some of you are thinking, like hell. And this won't be appropriate in every setting. But for 20 years now, I've been guaranteeing my fees. So if somebody works with me for a year and they're not ecstatically happy with what that's done for their business in that year, then full refund, no questions asked. I don't know, I have no accurate way of knowing how much business that has enabled to happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened. But my guess is it's well into 7 figures by now. A guarantee in itself has value. If you are passionate about your approach, if you are, bear in mind this is not a conditional fee, by the way. It's important to say that. It's a common misunderstanding that a guarantee is the same as a conditional fee. Not at all. In my case, People pay the fee fully upfront, and the guarantee is that if they got to the end of the year, it's a full refund. It's not a case of, well, I only get paid if you achieve X. That's not. The problem with that is it lacks that balancing of commitment. It's a lack of partnership in the relationship. A guarantee, on the other hand, seals the fact that there is partnership in the relationship. It can be relevant right now in today's world, where all too often the vast majority of people will run a million miles from the word guarantee. That's a good reason to look at it. Find something you can guarantee. You, of course, are not going to risk 6 months of 5 days a week project management based on a guarantee. Of course you wouldn't. But find something you can. It's worthwhile looking at. So in all of this, we've been talking about being the client's partner, not their servant. This is a pretty fundamental image that runs right through that 7-step approach. In many ways, that's about eliminating those who are incapable of partnership relationships. And that, of course, is an adventure in self-worth. Brian mentioned this, the self-worth element of this at the outset. Self-worth is important at many steps during this process, not just one, not just at the money bit. It's your whole willingness to take charge of the discussion. Even things like establishing a clear budget guideline before going off to write a proposal, that takes self-worth. The example I've just been giving on objection handling takes self-worth. And so does the willingness to close, the willingness to, as I prefer to think about it, to move into execution, to insist on their contribution to the project, rather than just all the things you're going to do for them. A lot of this is an adventure in self-worth, just as much as it is an adventure in commercial arrangements. So I've reserved a bit of time for discussion because obviously at on a session like this, there'll be many things I couldn't cover in a generic one. Very happy to carry on this individually. If there's anything that you don't want to cover in an open forum, that's often true around pricing. By all means, ping me an email and we can set up a time to talk about it. The book that we've alluded to at the beginning is on Amazon, as is The Courage to Ask. Just been republished on Amazon. And the suggestion is, wherever you are right now in project management, think about how you reposition your expertise and your services for the economy of the future. A lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is about repositioning expertise and repackaging it for tomorrow, not just for today. It's fairly clear now that there are many things that are just not going to go back to the way they were before, at least not anytime soon. And for many professionals, that means rethinking how they position themselves for the future, and therefore what will those insights they bring to first meetings, what will they be? Being able to bring a really crafted, tailored insight to your first meeting is a great way to start a value pricing adventure. So, what shall we talk about? We have about 10 minutes left, I think.
I have from a customer perspective on the insight and preparation. Be very careful with that. It's interesting experiences where I've had people that have clearly done 10 minutes desktop research and told me all about my company, obvious facts, but without realizing it's a different division or different country, or so they're just regurgitating the stuff that if they thought about it, know that you would know. So that's a put off straight from the start. But I've also had the other extreme in interviewing candidates that they know what dog I've got, how I walk, and whether I run or triathlon as well, which is spooky, but to the other extreme. So getting that right is tricky, but powerful when it works.
It is, though I would have to say that neither constitute an insight. Let's deal with them separately. The latter example of stalking is quite unnerving.
Yeah.
My suggestion is don't do it. full stop. Or if you do it, keep very quiet about it, because what you've learned, that's great, use it. But, you know, I would urge a lot of caution. And that's a huge time investment as well. Secondly, the bit about we know what all your issues are, that comes across as pretentious. Far from building trust, it usually has the opposite effect. Even if you read their annual report and you've been on the website and you believe you're fully fluent in their issues, those things are probably out of date by the time you actually get there, or they have nothing to do with the person you're talking to. An insight, again, this is a very misunderstood word. I'm going to have to find another word for this. But an insight in this context is you being fluent in the issues of their marketplace. So, you know, if they're in automotive and you happen to be fluent in automotive, as at least one person on the call is, then you can talk about what are the hot issues in automotive right now and some of the challenges that people are coming up against. You don't have to name their company, you don't have to name any other company to do so, but you show that you know their world, and you know that what's needed is a shift from X to Y. Or what's needed is, you know, a three-dimensional approach rather than a two-dimensional approach, etc. That is an insight. It's not a demonstration of how clever you are, and it's not a demonstration of stalking.
I suppose another approach is to ask rather than tell. So if you know automotive issues and you say, I know this is experiencing, is that impacting you? Which demonstrates insight, but also gets them to open up as to what their problems are as well. Yeah.
The sequence, so that's step 2, which is exploring need and exploring their world. But normally to earn the right to do that and also to steer the conversation where you want to go, it's important to have shared something early in the meeting that actually demonstrates that credibility. So you bring the insight as a can opener to open up the can of worms, if you like, some of which they may be unaware of or only dimly aware of.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question from Eve. Eve, do you want me to read that or unmute and ask if you wish?
I can ask it if you want to. Yes, my question was more about you discussed there the direct relationship with a customer, but what if we have a relationship with an integrator or with another company who's owning the project in the customer context? And then we have also to prove to the integrator, or what I call an integrator, and also to the customer, because we need direct link with the customer as well.
Yes, indeed. And the one of those global companies I mentioned earlier, that was exactly what they had. They were in one of their divisions, they worked through integrators. You basically have a double set of relationships to manage, and you are basically running a kind of two-dimensional approach through all of those steps that I mentioned earlier. Because the context that's vital to the integrator will not be the same as the context that's vital to the customer. So it does double the work all the way through. It also means you're going to, for example, have to discuss budget guideline from the standpoint of both parties. The budget guideline that might be fine for the end customer might not be fine for the integrator because they've got their parameters within which they have to manage the project. So it does double the work, Eve. I acknowledge that.
Okay.
However, here's the good news. There's one element that pretty much you can use across the board. One little 4-letter word. What is it?
Trust. No, it's fine.
Well, trust is the positive bit, but the word you can use across the piece is risk. Because risk will affect everyone. So by becoming fluent in the risks to be managed, once you learn what they are, you can usually use it both with integrator and with end customer. So get fluent in managing risk.
But it's good to realize that there is a different in interests between parties.
Yeah.
My experience is that specifically if you work through an integrator, they are triggered by projects as large as possible, so to say, where the customer is interested in value as much as possible and projects as small as possible.
Yeah.
It's important how to deal with that problem, so to say.
It is. And they will definitely quite often have a different view on quality issues. The key way to articulate that is talk about risk. You can translate your quality position into a risk management position. You'll have a more fluent conversation with every party involved.
Mm-hmm. Usually it's also important to know how the governance processes work, how decisions are made, also in the relationship between integrator and the end customers, so to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, so are there investment committees or stuff like that?
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And very often integrators become resentful of the relationship that you have with the end customer, because end customers will quickly determine that you know your stuff. So they'll want to build a relationship with you. Now, wise integrators will learn to work with that, but sometimes I have seen it whereby the integrator starts to block the relationship because they become fearful of it. Again, it's back to risk. They are managing their risk. They're perceived.
I think that selects the stupid integrators, sorry to say so, because I think it works quite negatively. If you work properly with people that the customer trusts, that only increases the trust in you as an integrator. Yeah,
it does. But unfortunately, there is some limiting thinking going on sometimes in the eyes of integrators or their bosses, perhaps. And therefore, someone can become very mistrustful of a close relationship between you and the end customer. However, let's come out of that rabbit hole. Any other questions, Brian, before we move to close?
None posted. Does anybody else, any other questions? I've posted John's email address should anyone wish to contact him.
Thanks, Brian. And the best gift I can give you then is an extra cup of coffee before you.
John, thank you very much. Awesome as always. Very interesting. We'll share the presentation. One last task left to me. Pavel, if you're still on. Pavel, if I said that correctly, Stagnik?
Yes. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm still here.
Good. You're the lucky winner. I'm sure, John, they all stayed because your presentation was fascinating, not just a year's free chapter membership. So, Pavel, you're our lucky winner.
Yeah.
Congratulations. We'll be in touch afterwards how to follow up on that, but you're our winner today. So,
in terms of risk management, Brian, how do you deal with it if the person who wins is then not there when you call them?
Because I'm checking. So they're online. And I did try to contact Pavel, but he hasn't answered. So we do it online interactively. So, but it is a risk.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Been a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Brian, and everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.